99.99999% of problems in the low end comes from a lack of perception. There's no difference in the way you handle the low end as the way you handle the high end. It's the same. If it's lean, you make it fatter. If it's boomy, you make it leaner.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. Hey, rock stars, it's your host, Lid Shaw, and welcome back to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the studio to meet with recording professionals, to hear their stories and learn from their experience so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is Fab Dupont, a multi-Grammy nominated writer, producer, and mixer. Fab has also been nominated for and won several independent music awards, Victoire de la Musique, Pan-African Music Awards, and South African Music Awards. Fab Dupont has traveled the world pursuing great music, but calls East Village of New York City his home, where his Flux Studios is home to many collaborations with great artists like Queen Latifah, Jennifer Lopez, Isaac Hayes, Shakira, Santigold, Marc Ronson, Les Nubians, Toots and the Maytals, Bon Jovi, Marc Anthony, Sean Lennon, John Travolta, Babyface, Nat King Cole, and Bebel Gilberto, to name just a few. Fantastic list of credits. Fab has taken his many years of recording and mixing experience, as well as his teaching experience, both on stage and on camera, and co-founded PureMix.net, an audio tutorial website dedicated to learning what is not in the manual. You can find out more about Fab at fabulousfab.com or go to puremix.net to learn more about mixing from Fab himself. Please welcome Fab Dupont to Recording Studio Rockstars. Fab, my friend, are you ready to rock?
Absolutely. I am ready to rock.
Excellent, man. I forgot. How do we say, are you ready to rock in French? Would we say, vous
you
êtes
don't say.
Prêt à rock?
No, you don't say you're ready to rock in French. We don't rock, per se.
You don't rock.
We just sit back, relax, and enjoy the show.
You groove.
Voila.
So, Fab, I've given an introduction, but clearly you've done so much stuff. Can you fill in some of the gaps for us and tell us more about who you are and how you got into music?
I got into music because my father was a frustrated saxophone player, and he didn't have the patience to practice and stuff like that. Basically, when I was, 6 or 7 years old, he said, here's an alto saxophone. You're going to be a saxophone player. And I was like, okay. I practiced saxophone. I got pretty decent at it. My mother, who's always been the practical one, said, the whole music thing is great, but you should have a backup plan. So I said, but I don't need a backup plan. I'm just going to be great at this. And she said, no, you need a backup plan. I have a great idea for a very secure backup plan in case you fail at saxophone. And she said, you could be a sound engineer, which is hysterical when you think about it. So I said, sure. Sounds great. So I diligently studied math and physics because in France, there's a really high-end state engineering school, insanely hard to get into, where you need, college-level physics and math to be able to get into this sound engineering school, which is also hysterical when you think about it.
A place where it actually is rocket science to record music?
It's stupid. So I studied very hard, failed the entry thing. There's like 30 seats and 3,000 applicants every year, right? So, and I knew it was possible to get in because one of my best friends got in, but he's a lot smarter than I am. So I failed the first year, I failed the second year, and then I cowardly abandoned my studies. And then, I just made music and made records. And then I came to Berkeley in the States. I made my first record as a producer, knowing nothing, having no training. When I was 17 years old, I rented a portable studio and I just recorded one of my piano teachers like that on intuition. Came out great. The record still sells.
This is in Boston?
No, this was in Paris.
In Boston?
This was in Paris
okay.
Before I came to Boston. So I came to Boston, to Berkeley. I already had produced 2 or 3 records, made an insane amount of recordings, but done it all completely, literally on intuition. I knew what an XLR was and where it should be plugged in. And I knew which end of the microphone you should point towards the instrument. And I knew that if you push the fader up, it gets louder. That was a good one to know. But I wasn't very much into EQ, so I just moved the microphone until it sounded less bad. Reverb was complicated, so I used as little as possible. I mean, it was really intuitive, but the records came out great, like very pure and everything. And I found a label, sold the records to the label. I was very entrepreneurial. Then the record did well, and as I said, it actually still sells to this day, that record, because the guy became famous after. And then his name is Emmanuel Bex. He's one of the most fierce organ players ever. As
cool.
Like an organ.
Hammond B3 kind of organ or church?
Yeah. No. Hammond B3, straight ahead, badass swing players. Don't forget, I was a saxophone player, so I was...
Right.
Yeah.
And you were at Berkeley studying the jazz scene.
Yeah.
I grew up in Boston, too. Boston has a real appreciation for jazz.
Yes, well, because of Berkeley. So all that happened, and it was time for me to move on. So I came to the States, I came to Berkeley, and then in Berkeley, I realized that I was never, ever going to be as good a saxophone player as David Sanborn. So if you're not going to be the best, if I was not going to be as good as David Sanborn or Cannonball, I was going to have to do something else. And my other talent, apparently, was that I was pretty good at figuring out how to record stuff. So I recorded stuff. I switched my major to songwriting instead of performance. I wrote a bunch of songs. I did a bunch of production. I found a job coming out of Berkeley, like literally a month after, as a composer for a multimedia company. So I wrote rims and rims of music. You know, one day you'd come in, it had to sound like a 15th century medieval fair because they were doing some, I don't know, whatever, bulb. And then the day after, it had to sound like, you know, German house, techno stuff. And then the day after, it had to sound like 60s Paul Simon stuff. So I wrote a lot of music like that. And then I made my records for myself, financed by the knockoff music. And then I toured, and then I moved to New York. And then New York is a tough town because in New York, everybody who can survive is a badass. So I had to shed and practice, and I made hundreds of songs and mixes, half of them for free, half of them for like $50, all the while playing insane rent and just trying to survive in the chaos that is New York.
Was this a time where you had to still go into a studio every time you wanted to do this, or were you using home studios?
I always worked out of my room. I never... Because I'm self-taught and because I make it up as I go, at least at the time, I couldn't really afford to book a studio to do what I did. You know, if you charge $200 for a mix and the dude shows up with a Pro Tools session with like 60 tracks, all named Audio 1 through Audio 60, you can't really book a studio for that. And I wasn't in a place of clout where I could say, look, dude, A, name your tracks, you know, and B, why don't you book Electric Lady for an afternoon so we can work in good conditions. I never felt that was a constructive way of making music at that time, especially for mixing.
Yeah,
I felt that I wanted to be able to take the song in the morning, look at it, name the freaking tracks, and then experiment. And you can't really experiment when there's a clock. So I always was kind of like a DIY guy, always.
Yeah.
And I built my own systems and I designed my own ergonomics. And whenever I was pulled to go into a pro studio, not that my spot wasn't pro, but in a more traditional studio, I was always extremely uncomfortable. Because if you were a Pro Tools guy, the Pro Tools stuff is on a cart to the left or to the right. So you're working 90% of the time and you're listening in mono with the left ear or the right ear. You're never facing the music. The music is always happening beside you. I hate that. I hate it.
Yes, I hate that. So in a lot of the pro studios, it was always like that. It's wheeled in front of the console or something.
Yeah, and then their Pro Tools rig is always horrible. They have like 3 plugins, never the right version. The IOs sound horrible because they had like bad clocking. It was never my thing. It always bothered me. So I built my own stuff. Within 6 months of moving to New York, I had my own room with my own live room that I paid for dearly. Yeah. But I organized my way, and we could make record at a speed that defies imagination, and no compromise. And also, I always found that the cue systems in pro studios were always abysmal. And as a player myself, I hate a bad cue system. So I spent a lot of money on a good cue system and made sure that the cues were always flawless, so that I get the best performance out of players. It's just stupid details like that. But professional studios are adapting. I own a professional studio right now, so I know how hard it is to keep things going and to make sure everything works.
I like to always say that, when you start a studio, get ready for that to be the end of buying gear. Get ready to buy air conditioning and cables and headphones and stuff like that.
The main problem is really the user experience. And I designed the user experience for myself, hoping that people would like it. Luckily, apparently people like it. But it's very, very hard to maintain a pro studio, to navigate the tradition, the expectations from people who've been in badly designed studios for years and got used to them, to people who don't understand the value of a good cue system and just treat it like it's nothing. There's a lot of stuff that goes into creating the proper experience for a musician recording music or creating music, which is a very different experience from recording music, actually.
You have arrived at a system that works so well in your studio. Have you found that the best way to expand on your own ability is to train your assistants and interns to really understand this way of working, and then you're able to step back a little more?
Oh, yeah. That's the idea. Flux is turned into kind of a collective. We have 4 rooms now. It's designed for my personal entertainment, but the fact of the matter is I use maybe an eighth of it because I do sleep from time to time. I travel, and I use mostly my mixing room. Unless I'm producing a record, then I'm going to use the front room with all the gear. Probably, I use maybe 20 days a year, maybe 30 days a year, but the rest of the time, there's an endless rotation of people who come in because they love the way it feels, and I can't take care of everybody. So I have whoever is lucky enough to pass the test to become an intern here. By the way, for those who are listening, the test is you have to be able to both read and write, which rolls out about 98% of all applicants. And also the ability to learn, that rolls out another %. So the 1% that stay get trained in the ways of the Flux. So it's good for them. People who come out of here do well. They make music. It's nice. So people here get trained, and the experience is designed so that people leave Flux feeling happy and having good sounding tracks. And that's what's going on. So we have a pretty good return rate. People who come here once. Yeah.
Very cool. Very cool. And just the idea of even having multiple rooms in New York City.
So it's completely surreal.
It's quite a challenge. Yeah.
Completely surreal and absurd. I will never do that again. The minute the landlord calls and pulls the plug and says, doubles my rent or sells the building for $1 trillion, I will not do this again because, I love the benefits. I love the community. We're kind of like the modern New York Motown. Everybody's here. The players all hang, network. Every day somebody shows up who doesn't have a session, but who had a session yesterday, and they come and see what's happening today. Yeah. It's nice. It's got a vintage vibe.
The community aspect is such an important part of the traditional studio scene, and it seems to be, generally speaking, the thing that is most at risk right now with home studios.
Completely gone. Completely gone. There is no emulation. There's no networking. There's nothing. So that's why Flux is cool. I'm mixing a record for somebody. Somebody else is tracking a record. They meet in the corridor. This person is going to sing on that person's record. You need a bass player. Happens to be one over there. You have an hour show. Come lay down on the bass track on this record. These people never met before. Everybody makes money. Everybody networks. Everybody broadens their horizons. It's pretty cool.
What do you see as the next level, the next stage for community in a world where these traditional studios have disappeared and people are in home studios? Have you seen an equivalent of great community online?
Well, no. It requires a business for a community to get built. I'm sorry if I sound callous, but the fact of the matter is like, it takes a lot of time and energy and a lot of resources to create a place where people can be peacefully in a safe and cozy environment. So somebody's got to pay the rent, somebody's got to pay for the coffee, and somebody's got to pay for, the cleaning, and somebody's got to mind it. And that takes time, that takes money, and that takes mind share. Flux is a business. The reason why it's a community is because I'm not very money oriented. And so I don't have a problem if people chill here. I don't have a problem if, within reason, obviously.
Right. That's not an open invitation, everybody.
I'm happy to have hangs on the roof where everybody comes and plays and everything. It's cool.
Yeah.
It's only supported by the fact that I work 6 days a week like a dog, and I pay the rent. So if you translate that online, it's going to have to be tied to somebody who has something to sell so that he can maintain the servers and maintain the thing. If you look at Gear Slots, for example, Julian is selling ads a lot. And that's why Gearsless exists. And it may have started as a way for him to network and get his questions answered. The way it is right now, it's a commercial facility. And
800 years ago.
Yeah. And so anything that has a commercial aspect to it is going to taint the debate, is going to taint the community.
But I think there's an experience in something like that where if people are getting an experience that they enjoy by being part of that community, then there's some value. Yeah. And as a reader, as a user, it's up to us to carefully filter through things on the internet. We have these incredible resources now, like YouTube, where you can go find videos on anything to teach you anything. But guess who's got to do all the work of sorting through that? You, the person who's watching it. You have to invest a lot of time to sort through that kind of stuff.
I know, and that's partly why PureMix was created. When PureMix was started, I was spending a sizable amount of my day answering phone calls and emails about people who were lost. Like, what should I buy? My 1176 does that. What do I do? It's weird. I use this compressor and my track sounds compressed. What do you propose? Don't use the compressor. It's like I spend a lot of time answering those questions, fielding calls, helping people and everything. And I was like, hey, there's nowhere to learn. Because if you go to YouTube, especially like in 2009, 2010, you went to YouTube to learn how to EQ a bass drum, whatever. Right. It was laughable. And it was mostly corrupted information, and it was bad. But we started PureMix because the time that I spent doing one-on-one support for everybody, I spent on PureMix and on creating PureMix. Came out pretty good.
Well, it's a cool model because it says, hey, if I dig your work, Fab, and I trust you as a mentor and a teacher, and I've seen you teach, and I would very quickly trust you as a mentor and a teacher, to have a community where I can go join, participate, learn about all kinds of stuff in the studio. And then as people ask questions and you answer them, you begin to build up a library of quality teaching and Q&A. That's really a smart way to do it.
Well, that's what we did. And actually, so now it was just Guillaume, my partner, another French guy, and me. And then it's grown so fast and so enormously, and people are so happy about it that we brought other people on. And now we have Ben and we have Marc. Marc has started a Facebook group, and he started the Facebook group like 2 weeks ago. It's exploding and people are asking questions and networking. And whenever I can, I go on and answer questions. We also have, in-person events. And then if I go to trade shows, I chill with people. I help them the best I can. So there's a big thirst for knowledge since there's no more, you can't learn empirically watching somebody else do it anymore because there's very few places left. And also financially, it's very difficult for somebody to have someone work for them making music. It's very hard to do. Because there's not enough money to feed one person to start with most of the time. So feed two is unthinkable. And then free labor can only go so far. So you can't really learn on the job. So places like PureMix are a good way to learn. So I feel a tremendous responsibility that the information there should be extremely vetted. Basically, no bullshit at all, zero. And also comes from the best people in the world. And also that it's not just a depository for unconnected videos. It's a place where you can get the help you need to go from A to B, which is also very hard. So we're working on it. It's
cool. And one of the things that you do as a teacher that I really enjoyed seeing was the way you sort of broke outside of the box, literally outside of the box, and you teach from a stage. And you've got drums on stage, and you've got a DAW up there and an assistant, and you guys are up there miking and recording and mixing a complete song in front of a live audience, which is just such a cool concept.
It's really intense. It takes somebody who has no shame and no fear of failure because there's many opportunities for failure in such an environment. As you know, if you run a recording session, something will break. Something that worked just fine a second ago will die in the middle of the first take. It's guaranteed. So doing that on camera with the ability to redo when something breaks is one thing. It's hard enough as it is. But doing that live on stage with 300 people watching and...
Well, I like to say that the greatest skill that as engineers we bring to a recording session is the skill of the workaround, which is that ability to say, no matter what I'm going to run into, because I am going to run into an obstacle, I will figure out a way to work around it and keep the session rolling.
That's the job. The job is not to know where to put the microphone in front of the bass drum. That's easy. The job is to know what to do when the drummer just broke up with his girlfriend. That's hard. There's always something screwing up, and being able to fix it is the job. It's not very glamorous.
Yeah. Well, I was going to ask you, as I like to ask all of my guests, for an inspirational quote to launch us off. I know we're already deep into the interview, but I almost think you just gave us a great inspirational quote, which is the job is to know what to do when the drummer breaks up with his girlfriend. But do you have anything else you'd like to share with us as well?
Yeah, I think there's the number one thing that I see people who get into this, whether it be engineers or producers, who tend to get lost a little bit because it's easy to get lost. There used to be two options for compressors. I mean, if you talk back in the day, you had to know what in and out were. And then as it got better, the gear got more potent, I would say. You had to learn how to use an SSL. Mm-hmm. Okay. If you start today, supposedly, I've been told that computers are supposed to simplify the system. Hell no. I mean, the computers and the unbelievable plethora of options have basically made it incredibly hard for anyone to learn how to do anything. Because what DAW do you use? What plugins do you use? What microphones do you use? I mean, you were in 1969 or in the 70s. Would you like a 47 or a 67 today, sir?
Yeah.
If you come today, it's like you have hundreds of choices of microphones, which, if you read the literature, they're all the best microphone ever made. And this microphone is great for vocals, and this microphone is great for background vocals, and this microphone is great for the inside bass drum, and this microphone is great for the outside bass drum. What? It's a membrane that vibrates when the air moves, you know? So my what I tell people who work with me or people I make records with, when I see them get lost into the ocean of information that's required to be able to even get music out of the speakers, I tell them, just remember one thing. Don't ever forget that you're into this because of the music. Don't ever forget. It's about the music. It's not about the cable. It's not about the freaking clock for your converters. It's not about the $7,000 compressor. It's not about any of that. None of that matters. Nobody is going to rock to your compressor. It doesn't matter. None of that matters. The only thing that matters is the music. Everything else is details. And if you remember that, it's a lot easier to get through. But a lot of people forget. When you get lost, it's easy to blame the gear or lack of gear. It's easy to just delay the lack of inspiration by sorting your TT cables, you know? The thing is, this is just a Band-Aid. The gear is a Band-Aid.
That's deep, dude. That's actually really deep what you just said. I experience all that all the time. The many times I've defaulted to hooking up more stuff in the studio rather than write the next song that I want to write.
Yeah, because it's hard. Art is painful. But geeking out on attack and release speeds is not painful. It's like checking Facebook. It's endless, but it serves no purpose. The thing that is of value is the music. I remember clearly the reason why I'm able to communicate the knowledge base to people is because I remember how it felt to not know. It's horrible to not know. I hate not knowing. So I remember deeply the frustration of trying to mix a track and knowing how I wanted it to sound and not being able to get there.
Yep.
And not knowing if what I was doing was the right thing. And maybe I was not doing something that could have made it better. Because since there's no benchmarks, you don't know. You never finish a mix. You just abandon it when it becomes truly stupid.
Yeah.
The amount of time that you spend on it. So I remember those feelings of not knowing, of insecurity, of saying, oh, is the vocal sound as good as it could be? I mean, what do you do with 500 hertz?
Right.
Is 500 hertz my friend? No, it's not my friend. All those things gather into this ball of pain that is insecurity and weight on people's shoulders, and they forget to listen to the song. Nobody gives a flying fuck about 500 hertz. As long as you can hear the song and it doesn't hurt your eyes when you listen to it,
Hurt
you're
your
good.
eyes.
I
like it.
So of course, once you get over that, there's the race for excellence. You want your record to be the best sounding, fattest, most badass, immersive experience ever, and that's great. And that's good. But you can't ever lose track of the bottom line. That is that the music is what matters. It is understandable that it's fun to play with the toys and it's fun to have the right tools. I have many times tried to put a nail in the wall with a screwdriver because that's all I had at that moment. And I was too lazy to go get the hammer downstairs. I'm not talking that level of disconnection from equipment. I'm talking about you don't need 4 sizes of hammers to be able to put the nail in the wall. You can shrink your equipment requirement to what is a comfortable minimum so that you can focus on the music and not on the gear. Yeah. I can't tell you the difference in joy and quality of life once I started shrinking down the amount of gear that I use. These days, I use Pro Tools, a keyboard and mouse, the fastest possible computer, a pair of dangerous converters, a dangerous 2-bus. I just mixed a record yesterday where I'm using 2 Convert 8s D2A converters, a dangerous 2-bus, and an A to D. No other hardware. There's probably $250,000 worth of hardware sitting around me right now. I used none of it. I used the 2-bus and the converts, and that's it. Because that is the key. It's fun to have, and when you need them, it's great to have them, but you don't necessarily need them. Maybe 10 years ago, when the computer would blow up after you put 6 plugins on it, and the best possible sounding EQ had aliasing that would make your teeth hurt. Yes. Today you need a laptop, some interface that sounds good, 2 good microphones, and a really great room and a pair of speakers. That's it.
Yeah. Well, so now, Fab, you're answering questions before I get to them, which is wonderful. Do you mind if we take a moment and kind of jump into your process in the computer a little bit and geek out on a few questions?
Go for it.
So here's a question that I hear a lot, which is just as simple as this. How do you get the low end right in your recording or your mix?
Get a better room. Get a better room.
Okay, can you elaborate on that just a little bit? Why does a better room make your low end or your mix sound better?
Because 99.99999% of problems in the low end comes from a lack of perception. There's no difference in the way you handle the low end as the way you handle the high end. It's the same. If it's lean, you make it fatter. If it's boomy, you make it leaner. It's the same as if it's bright, you make it darker. It's not that complicated. It's the same EQ. It works the same way. The problem is most people can't really hear what's going on because it's very hard to have a room that sounds good in the bottom. Mm-hmm. So most mixes I hear from people, the bottom is horrible. It's either unbelievably blown up or it's not there. Mm-hmm. Like literally somebody forgot to turn the bass drum and bass track on. And the reason for that is 98% of all rooms, the speakers are in the wrong position of the room. The room's too small. And there's no bass traps because it's not as sexy to buy a pair of bass trap as it is to buy a very Mew.
Yeah. What was that thing we said about studios earlier? It's not, You're not going to be buying gear. You're going to be buying boring stuff.
Yeah. But it's not boring, man. I mean, I used to think that way. You're correct. But now I don't care. I really don't care. I just want to press play and what comes out of the speakers is real.
Yeah.
So the problem is like even in commercial studios, I mean, I just tracked a huge record in a studio in Santa Monica. The first day I pressed play on my references and I turned towards the assistants and I said, who works here? And are these the speakers that everybody uses? And the guy was like, yeah. What's the problem? I said, it's like watching Fox News. It's like there's nothing real going on here. So I had a pair of focals flown in and I set up to the side of the console to be able to understand what was going on. Even in like $1 million rooms, sometimes what you hear is totally absurd.
Yeah.
I go to my friends' rooms. Like I just did a really awesome record last year with this French band called Elephant. Really great band.
Cool.
And I went to his writing room and I sat down with him and I said, okay, play me the tracks. And he played me the tracks and said, okay, I understand why the stuff you sent me has no bass on it because where he was sitting was probably plus 12 dBs at 60 hertz. So he felt he was doing great because what he heard was not reality. So if you want, the problem is that the high end is easy. You put 3 curtains on your walls and you're fine. Low end is a very big endeavor to fix the low end of a lesser room. Since it's hard to push the walls because walls are solid and made out of material that's not easy to push, you have to resort to weird tricks like trapping the corners, using active bass traps, moving the speakers one inch at a time until it's less bad. There's a lot of stuff that goes into tuning a room that is not accessible to the common immortals. And so my advice to people who are stuck like that is get smaller speakers. The smallest the speaker you can stand, the better off you are. And get closer to your speakers if they're small. And get yourself a pair of headphones that don't lie to you, which most do, so be careful. And don't despair, it'll happen. But 98% of the time, it has nothing to do with the equipment. It's always the room.
Now, one thing that always perplexed me a little bit was, despite the need for such a quality room when you're making decisions in mixing, somehow, miraculously, you can listen to the crappiest jam box anywhere you want, and you can tell right away when the low end sounds great on a mix or sounds like a mess, it seems like.
Because those are small speakers.
Yeah.
So if you don't excite the room, then you don't get the room problems. It's hard to excite the room with a boombox, except, of course, if you're a hooligan, and play it on stun. But the fact of the matter is, like, basically, if you don't excite the room, you're fine. But where's the fun in that?
Right.
You know,
yeah.
I mean, I have an SPL meter on my desk, and I mix at, I would say 50% of the time I mix at 87 SPL, 25% of the time I mix at 79 SPL, and 25% of the time I mix at levels that should not be published. So the idea is I control my listening environment cognitively. I'm making a conscious effort by looking at a needle to not blow myself with level so that I can do this 10 hours every day and remain objective and not lose my perspective. Now, the thing is, if you have a client with you in the room, that goes out the window because they're deaf. If you have a drummer with you, that's the end of the world because he bangs on shit all day long and it's bright as hell when you sit in front of a snare drum. So their hearing is pretty much gone. Yeah. They're going to want to hear it loud and you're screwed.
Or if you're doing guitar overdubs in the control room, rock guitar overdubs.
That's a fun one, I no longer do that. Basically, the idea is you are going to play your speakers loud if you work with people. So you have to have a loud option. But if you want to fix the bottom of your mixes, get a quiet option. Get a pair of like CMS 40s or a small, perfect balanced speaker like that. Put it close to you, like arm's reach max, and mix on that. And you won't believe the difference.
What are the CMS 40s? Can you tell us more about those?
That's a Focal. I work a lot with Focal because I help them tune their speakers. I like what they do for most of their models. I work on SM9s, which are a loud speaker, literally, hence the name loudspeaker. In their models, the small models, the CMS 40s, CMS 50s are awesome. They're really well balanced. They just work great. They're just a great reference speaker. If you want something louder, you can get a Solo 6. That's also a perfectly balanced speaker. Or if you have a big enough room, you can get a pair of SM9s.
Great. We'll include links to all that, Rockstars, in the show notes so you can check those out. Now, Fab, go ahead.
I just want to say one thing. There's a myth that if you want a lot of bass, you have to have a big speaker. If you want a lot of loud bass, you have to have a big speaker. Think of your headphones. Let's take a horrendous example. Beats by Dre. Headphones. How big is that driver? 1.5 inches? How much bass do you get from those headphones? Way too much bass.
Right.
So you can have too much bass from a tiny, tiny little driver. It depends on how close you are from it and how loud you want it to be. So if you get a pair of CMS 40, which is a tiny speaker, and you get it very close to you and don't play it very loud, you'll be able to get a rendition of what's going to go on in the world. It's very useful.
Are you familiar with SonarWorks, the plugin that will sort of reverse EQ your headphones to offer a flat response?
Yes, I am. All that stuff, and I'm sure it's a great algorithm, and those kids are awesome, and they are very passionate. I met them at trade shows, and they work very hard. People have been making records for 800 years using none of that technology.
Yeah.
So it's about discernment, meaning You have to create your own references, and by averaging listening experience over time.
Mm-hmm.
So the way you can do it easily is as such. Pick a piece of music that you will not get tired of. So right there, it's hard. And then take that piece of music and have it on your phone and listen to it on headphones, all headphones. Listen to it on speakers, all speakers. You step in a car, have an aux cable. Now, there's a core, there's an average to all this, right? There's the piece of music. If the piece of music is one entity, every listening experience is going to be different. If you listen to it in the car, your car, if you listen to it in your mother's car, they're going to be set different, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the difference between the two is the systems. The thing that doesn't change is the source.
Mm-hmm.
If you listen to the same source to 20 different places over the years, you'll be able to sit down somewhere, anywhere, listen to 4 bars of that piece of music, and you'll know exactly what the system is doing to you.
Mm-hmm.
So by averaging over time the listening experience of a reference or several reference pieces of music, you'll be able to know exactly what's going on and no longer make mistakes. You don't have to, and then you can guide yourself towards buying the equipment that works for you because you know how it sounds, because you know the core of the music, so you will know the sonic imprint of the equipment by habit.
Well, so Fab, one of the things that I really appreciated about some of your music that I've heard is the sound of the drums. You know, for example, I wanted to ask you if there was any tips you want to give us, stuff to think about. If you're composing and mixing and you want to do something that's sort of maybe a hip hop style and you just want to have a really killer kick and snare sound, can you point us in some good directions to go?
Yeah, less is more. If you find yourself an hour into your session, your writing session, your production session, and you have 4 bass drum, you're probably screwing up. Layering is key, but you have to layer intently. If you're talking about a hip-hop track, modern hip-hop track, like what's going on right now, it's all over the place. I mean, you can't talk about Jay-Z or Drake in the same thing,
right.
You know? There's no real common denominator. Basically, the idea is this. There's tendency of wanting to work loud to get the excitement when you create music, which is fun. The problem is that you will most likely screw up the bottom of your track, which means your bass drum is going to sound pretty bad if you work that way. So it's important to have, I organize my writing sessions or my production sessions in periods. There's periods where I just blast myself, where, you know, I need a seatbelt to stay in front of the speakers. And then there's periods where I work at 79 SPL and I just fix whatever mess I created when I was blasting myself.
Yeah.
So there's rational periods and there's kind of like engineering periods.
So Rockstar's 79 SPL is, I think for most of you, you would consider that a pretty gentle volume coming out of the speakers. And a reminder that means if you've got somebody else milling about, making noises, picking things up in the room and kind of clanking about the control room, it's going to really distract you.
Yes, it will. So here's a trick. It works. It's great. If you're mixing with somebody and you cannot have a conversation with that person while you're mixing, then you're mixing too loud.
Great.
And you're probably going downhill rapidly. For production, sometimes you just need it to go boom, but then know full well that if you start layering your bass drum while it goes boom, you're screwed. Because when you go back down to normal human levels, it will sound puny. So layering is key to get the modern sounds. However, once you start layering, especially bass drums, you're going to get lots of phase problems. So you have to really scrutinize the bottom. And a good way to do this is you pick your main bass drum, the one that has the character, right? The one that's recognizable, that's going to make you the next Timbaland. But that one probably doesn't have enough bottom, right? Yeah, we want it to be fat, otherwise we're not real men. So to make it fat, you're going to add another bass drum, which on its own is absolutely bananas. However, you may notice that when you put it in conjunction with the first one, the one that was going to make you Timbaland, the two of them together, something's not quite right. So the problem is, even for electronic elements, there are phase relationships between things. You have your drums tight and your bass is tight and everything sounds great. And then you go up to the chorus, it goes up a fourth, and all of a sudden the bottom falls apart. Because the phase relationship with all those elements shifts with the key, with the notes, and with whatever you had for breakfast that morning. So it's really hard to keep track of. When you're working on a bass drum, because that's one of the hardest examples to deal with, make sure you listen to sample A by itself, sample B by itself. Listen to sample A and then add sample B. Does the bottom stay? Does it shift? Does it go away? very often it'll just go away. And what most people do is that they add a third sample to alleviate the problem of when they added the second sample, the bottom of the first sample went away. So now you're dealing with 3 phase relationships: joy, happiness, and revelry. So now you're listening to the third sample, sounds bananas. Second sample sounds bananas. First sample sounds like Timberland. Joy. You remove the solo and all of a sudden it starts sounding like nothing. So it's very important to scrutinize those relationships. And once you identify the problem, you have to address it right away. So if you don't have a phase adjustment plugin like the IBP from Universal Audio, from Little Labs from Universal Audio, or the Sound Radix stuff, which is fantastic. If you don't have that, then what you can do is you could change the sample start on your samples. So say your Timberland bass drum is your reference, and then the second bass drum is probably slightly out of phase, not 100% polarity, just like, maybe 35 degrees out of phase. If you change the in sample a little bit, you can manipulate when it shows up on the timeline, and then you can actually change the phase relationship between the 2 samples. I do that all the time. It's better than moving the MIDI notes, because if you move the MIDI notes, you can't use quantize anymore, and it becomes a pain. Mm-hmm. So you just move the samples. It's the electronic equivalent as moving a microphone in the acoustics world. Mm-hmm. When I record drums, I spend a lot of time making sure that the bottom is tight, which is why my music sounds the way it does. And it's 90% of the time, it's phase alignment, either moving a microphone or literally rotating phase between 2 kicks and the bass to make sure that they stay out of each other's way and that the bottom stays natural. You can tell when the bottom is belabored, like there is something not flowing, uneasy. Even if it sounds fat sometimes, the attack is a little phasey, something just feels bad.
Yeah, loses focus.
So you have to really focus on that. And the thing is that there's no absolute. It's all a relative game. Something's going to feel great right now and horrible 15 minutes from now. The A-Being is key, being very conscious of whatever you do in the bottom.
Well, so Fab, I'm going to take a break here for just a second, then we'll come back in for the jam session. But I want to thank you very much for sharing all those deep insights into mixing and getting the kick drum right, the low end right. I would reiterate to you, rock stars, that what I'm hearing Fab talk about is pretty simple. It's make sure you can really hear what's going on with the low end and know that you physically can't last if you've got it too loud. You're just going to wear yourself out. So create an environment for yourself where you can keep the level down low, hear clearly what's going on in the low end, and make these smart decisions about phasing and everything. Rock stars, I want to remind you that we will include links to everything that we're talking about with our guest Fab Dupont today on the show notes. You can find those at recordingstudiorockstars.com or type in rsrockstars.com. If you're listening on the podcast app on your iPhone, just open up the app. You'll see the logo there. If you touch on it, it should turn into the show notes screen. We'll take a break right now, and we'll come back in for the jam session. Hey everybody, it's Lid Shaw, and I want to thank you so much for listening to this episode of Recording Studio Rockstars. I really appreciate you, and I really appreciate your time. And as a way of saying thank you, I've created a special mix tutorial just for you, Rockstars, totally free, called the Mix Master Bundle. With it, you get over 2 hours of detailed videos watching over my shoulder as I mix a song in my studio. Plus, I give you the free ebook that explains how I recorded the tracks, and you get downloadable multi-tracks so that you can practice your mixes, including the Pro Tools session file, using nothing but stock plugins in Pro Tools, all of which you would find in any other DAW, whether you're on Logic or Studio One or Reaper. Maybe you're struggling with trying to improve your mix technique, or maybe you just simply don't have access to multi-track files or can't record a full drum set in your studio. I wanted to give you a chance to create your own mixes from full drum kit, bass, and guitars recorded in my studio. The song is called American Winter, and it's off my instrumental record Skadoosh, and it's all available for you totally free right now. All you need to do to get it is text Mix Master Bundle to 33444, and I'll send it directly to your email. Again, that's Mix Master Bundle with no space to 33444, or you can go directly to mixmasterbundle.com, enter your email, and I'll send all the files directly to you. Thanks so much, rock stars. We'll see you guys in the jam session. Cheers. Welcome back to Recording Studio Rockstars. We're going to jump into the jam session now with our guest, Fab Dupont. And Fab, are you ready to jam?
Of course, always.
Always. All right. So Fab, when you got started out in recording, what was one of the things that was really holding you back?
Focusing on the wrong stuff. I was lost in the recording and I spent less time than I should listening to the actual music coming out of the speakers. I was having fun with the toys. That's a bad look. I make records with a laptop made by a fruit company, an Apollo 8, and 2 Atlantises, and a pair of Focal Spirit Pro headphones. I make full records with that stuff. No compromise.
That's great, man. That's great. All right. So now how about some of the best advice you received when you were getting into this stuff?
Chris Muth, who is one of the co-founders of Dangerous Music, the first time he heard some of my mixes, we were in the same building in New York. And Dangerous Music was on the 4th floor and I was in the basement. He came down, I don't know why. I have no idea. Taking some trash out, or maybe the electric blew up or something. I don't know. So he was there. And he said, hey, play me some of your stuff. Now, Chris Muth was the head tech of the Hit Factory for 20 years. And then he's the guy who designed all of Sterling Sound, the mastering house in New York. I mean, he's a total absolute badass. He has the best oral memory of anybody I've ever met. I think even longer oral memory than George Massenburg. It's insane. I had just set up my room in the basement, and then he came down and listened to it, to one track that I was very proud of. He looked at me and he said, you kind of suck, but you have good intentions. And I'm like, what? And he said, you're losing, you have good intentions, but you're not paying attention to what's important. And so I said, something that's probably shouldn't be said on the air. And then I sent him back up. And then I thought about it for a while. And then that was a good piece of advice. And then George Massenburg, I played in some of the stuff I was doing. And he said, you might want to consider using less equipment and using it better. I was like, thanks, George. Fuck you too. So I got the same advice from several people. Most of the advice that I got that were relevant to me, technically, were about focusing on music and not focusing on the gear. And I stopped focusing on the gear years ago. I used to go to the bathroom with a Sweetwater catalog, Now I couldn't care less. Except for vintage keyboards. I still have a problem with vintage keyboards. Yeah. But for everything else, I don't care.
Yeah, I know the Sweetwater catalog. That's where it lives. And Tape Op magazine has gone there with me.
That's a good one too. Or Sound on Sound.
Sorry, but, I mean that only with the greatest of respect, Larry.
Of course. Tape Op rocks.
Knowing that it's all about the music and it's not about the gear, can you share with our listeners a great recording tip, hack, or secret sauce, something that they could use on their next session this week?
Yeah. Don't put the microphone too close to the source. Took me years to figure that one out. Here's the problem. When you listen to a vocal in solo, right? If you don't put the vocalist literally, eating the microphone, it's going to sound far away and not modern, and it's going to sound roomy, depending on how bad your room is. So your tendency is going to be to want to be as close as possible to get as much of the presence as possible, especially for vocals. But it's the same for all instruments. The problem is if you do that, that's when you start generating insane amounts of problem. You're going to compress more. You're going to have to de-ess the hell out of everything. It just generates a lot of problems. So my piece of advice is next time you record a vocal, for example, try and push your singer back as far as you can possibly stand before it becomes physically painful to listen to. And at the beginning, that may be 2 inches and maybe 3 inches. But if you can make yourself push the singer back a little bit at a time, and you'll notice that when you remove the solo, when you listen to the singer in the track, the room will disappear, first thing. And then you're going to start adding reverb to compensate for the fact that it's dry anyway. So the fact is, if you can try and put a little distance between the source and the microphone, you will notice you will use a lot less compression, a lot less de-essing. And it's difficult to do. It takes a while. You have to fail a couple times before you find the right spot. But that's something that you should try. Obviously, if you're recording a band live and everybody in the same room and bashing like hooligans, you don't really have a choice. Mm-hmm. But if you're recording discrete stuff, like for example, guitar, if you have a good acoustic guitar and you want to record yourself with a good instrument that's going to sing a little bit, and you have a room that's not offensive, try not putting the microphone on the 11th fret, pointing at the sound hole, like you read on Gear Slut. Try and push it back a little bit and see how it feels. And don't forget to listen to your microphone in the context of the track, not just in solo. You'll find that the listener experience and the amount of grief to provide a proper listening experience will be lesser if you can put some distance between the source and the mic.
So that's a great tip, Fab. And I'm glad that you bring up acoustic guitar, because that is one place where I've repeatedly noticed that when I go out to play the acoustic myself, I really prefer to hear it very loud in the headphones and to have more bass. I'll think it sounds great in the headphones, and I come out to the speakers and I'm like, oh, it just sounds so like it has a blanket over it and it's too much low end. You got any tips for why do we experience that, and should we do anything about that, or is everything fine and not broken?
Well, everything's broken because of the aforementioned laws of physics that we can't change yet. It's because you're used to feeling the guitar in your body. So you'll notice that electric guitar players don't have that problems. When you play an acoustic guitar, a sizable percentage of the experience is the resonance of the guitar against your body. Mm-hmm. So you're trying to recreating that by having the microphone create a sonic version of that. The problem is that if you're not a guitar player and you don't have that experience, which is what you become again when you go back into the other side of the glass, all of a sudden you don't have that experience anymore. And it feels weird to have something that's super boomy compared to other things. The other thing that may happen is often the cue system is out of phase. So you're listening, that happens a lot for singers. You go into the live room where the singer was, the headphones are so unbelievably loud that you could literally kill someone at a distance with the level coming out of their headphones. And I know singers, very sensible people, and I think, how can you possibly stand having those headphones on your head? And they're like, it's not that loud. I'm like, are you kidding? And then you bring them in the live room and you tell this to press play, and they're horrified by hearing the sound of the thing coming out of the headphones. Yeah. What happens is that because they're singing, they have their sound is inside their head, right? If you plug your ears, you'll hear your sound inside your head when you speak. Do it, it's fun. And then if you put headphones on top, if the sound comes back from the control room out of phase with the sound that's inside your head, it's going to cancel out. And it's going to sound weird, and you're going to push the hell out of that monitor, and that's how you're going to make yourself deaf, even though you won't feel that way because half of the sound is canceled by the resonance inside your head. It's very odd, but it's very true.
And I've experienced versions of that when I've been in the control room and I'm testing a mic with headphones on and I have a phase button near me, flipping the phase or the polarity. And I realized, I'm like, whoa, it sounds completely different the other way. Oh, I know what I was listening to both sides of a figure 8 microphone. So when I went to the back, I thought it didn't sound right. And it was just because the phase was flipped in my headphones.
The perception of the player and the perception of the producer are completely different things. And if you happen to be the same person, player and producer, it takes a while to be able to figure out how to not ruin your take. So further away is always better if you can afford to do it acoustics-wise and placement-wise in your track.
That's great. What a great tip. Thank you for that, Fab. So I'm going to jump forward a little bit and just get to the last questions. How about a favorite software tool, something that you always like to have around on your sessions?
Pro Tools. No matter how broken it is, it's still the best one.
Okay, cool. All right, we'll jump forward to the next one. How about a resource for the business side of doing this? People who do want to do this for more than a hobby. Resources for them or advice?
Here's the number one piece of advice. Go out. That's it. Go out, meet people, network. It's not about how good you are. It really isn't about how good you are. How good you are is the entry level, is the ticket to get into the theater. Once you're in the theater, if you want to be part of the play, you have to meet the cast. And so let me tell you what not to do. Don't rent a room somewhere by yourself in a basement. Make it the best possible thing in the world and mix hundreds of songs until you become pretty good at it, good enough for your records to be arguably world-class. Don't do that. That's bad. That's not the way to do it. What you need to do is you need to do that during the day, and you need to go out every night. You need to go out in your scene every single night, and you need to meet people, and you need to work with people. Working by yourself is not a good look. You have to work with other people. Yeah. Even if you're the next Prince or if you're the next whomever, it doesn't matter. You have to work with people because the work will come from your network and the money will come from your network. It will not come from your work. Your work is the reason why your network will grow eventually, but you have to start building a network of people. I never did that. And so, because I didn't know, I thought, my mother told me when I was a kid, if you're the best at what you do, people will come. True, but not enough people for it to be viable in today's music economy. My advice to you is Save the money you were going to spend on that venue to buy drinks, go to concerts, meet people,
and
go backstage.
Social media is not a substitute for actually going out and meeting people.
Absolutely not. Social media is a way for Facebook to sell ads to you. It has nothing to do with proper networking. But as far as the ability to create a work environment where somebody needs a hip hop beat, they have to know that you're that person. And for them to know that you're that person, they have to know you exist, and they have to have been there, and they have to know that you're a good business person, that you're not going to screw them, that you're not going to not deliver, that you're not going to blow the deadline, and that you know the difference between on or off on most of your equipment. So that is the number one thing that you should do at the beginning of a career, even before you get good, is network, meet people, and work your ass off so that you're the best in the world. But if nobody knows intimately, one-on-one, that you're the best in the world, you'll just be the best in the world for yourself, your girlfriend, and your mother. That's about it.
Thanks, Mom. So, Fab, thank you so much for joining us and for giving so much of your time. I and the Rockstars thank you from the bottom of our heart, and want to just ask you how people can find you. How can our listeners follow you? Where would you like them to go to learn more about you?
I guess PureMix is the easiest way. It's puremix.net, because there's more and more social content happening. We're going to experiment with live streaming of mixing sessions starting next week. To reach me, I'm the easiest man to reach. You can find me on Facebook, although I have hundreds of messages backlog. I tend to get to them. It just takes time. Or on PureMix, you'll find lots of information, lots of free content. There's lots of contests where you can win gear by mixing a song if you're good at mixing. That's the easiest place to find me, because the rest of the time, the email thing, I just can't handle anymore. There's too many emails coming in. I tend to select all and delete once a month because it's just overwhelming.
Well, Fab, again, thank you so much for joining us on Recording Studio Rockstars. We're very honored to have you here with us. And we look forward to seeing more of you checking out PureMix and just seeing you around the digital studio.
Thank you so much.
All right, dude. Cheers. We'll talk soon.
Ciao.
Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, please leave a rating and review on iTunes to help reach more people. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to recordingstudiorockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And if you want more free content, all you have to do is text RS Rockstars to 33444. Again, that's RS Rockstars to 33444, and I'll keep you in the loop with articles, videos, and podcast updates. And I'll let you know about any upcoming giveaway offers, all totally free. Thanks for listening. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music.